Section: Introduction. In this section, we explore evidence from developmental psychology and primatology that indicates humans, and possibly other primates, have an inherent drive to create new forms of shared intentionality. Shared intentionality means that individuals can align their intentions, goals, values, and understanding of the world in a way that is recognizable to each other. This drive helps us achieve common knowledge, leading to a deeper understanding of one another through both intentional and physical interactions. We begin this journey in infancy, where primary intersubjectivity emerges through face-to-face interactions, mutual gazes, and emotional connections between caregivers and children. As we grow, we develop secondary intersubjectivity, which involves including a third party in our interactions. This stage introduces joint attention, gestures, and eventually language. Importantly, these interactions are often pursued for the sake of understanding each other, rather than for immediate rewards or conforming to external language rules. We hypothesize that during the Paleolithic era, a genetic motivation evolved that encouraged social coordination for its own sake, which was not present in apes. This minimal motivation, which we refer to as cognitive gadgets, facilitated the development of language, art, and culture. We suggest that humans evolved a desire not just to understand others, but also to be understood, fostering mutual awareness and promoting both primary and secondary intersubjectivity. This led to shared intentionality expressed through turn-taking, imitation, cultural evolution, language, and various forms of representation like art and music. We also address the hard problem of consciousness, which is the challenge of explaining how physical brain processes lead to subjective experiences. We recognize that our attempts to convey our experiences, like the color red, are limited and cannot fully express how it feels to us. Despite this, we continue to strive for understanding from others. We question how this desire to be understood can be measured without external rewards, as seen in structured language games. We propose that intrinsic motivation can explain the spontaneous creation of new language games for the joy of communication. This motivation must be biologically plausible and rely on our internal models of others, based on our observations and actions. Unlike previous theories, we suggest that this drive does not require complex reasoning and may exist shortly after birth. We also explore the idea that this drive includes a desire to be influenced by others. In our study, we focus on primary intersubjectivity and examine it through a simulation called the Perceptual Crossing Paradigm, PCP. In this setup, two individuals interact using avatars controlled by a mouse, experiencing feedback when their avatars cross paths or interact with stationary objects. Our goal is to understand how these interactions develop turn-taking strategies and preferences for engaging with one another, rather than just with fixed objects. Previous simulations have shown that while policies can evolve to increase self-other interactions, they often rely on an external oracle to identify interactions. We aim to investigate the nature of this other detection and propose intrinsic motivation functions that can promote self-other interaction without prior knowledge of the interaction occurring. Section Summary. In this section, we explore the human drive for shared intentionality, which enables individuals to align their intentions and understand each other, starting from primary intersubjectivity in infancy to more complex forms of interaction. We propose that this intrinsic motivation for mutual understanding evolved biologically, allowing for the co-creation of language and culture, and we investigate this through the perceptual crossing paradigm to understand how agents can recognize and interact with each other without external rewards. Section: Empirical Evidence. In this section, we explore the concept of language development through a thought experiment involving newborn infants isolated on a desert island, cared for by robots. We question whether these infants would develop language, suggesting that if they did, some genetic and environmental factors must contribute to this ability, distinguishing humans from chimpanzees. If they do not develop language in one generation, it implies that cultural transmission, like prior language use, is essential for language acquisition. We draw parallels to a language model like ChatGPT, which, without exposure to language data, cannot create new language but can replicate existing language patterns. This model may seem to understand language but lacks the motivation to invent new forms of communication. Tomasello argues that humans are uniquely driven to achieve shared intentionality, which involves forming joint goals and mutual understanding through prosocial behaviors. Collaboration is inherently rewarding for children, often more so than the task itself. However, Kaplan and Hafner note that Tomasello does not clearly define what this sharing motivation entails or how the brain recognizes shared experiences. We reference Trevarthen's work on infant interactions, highlighting how infants engage in face-to-face communication with caregivers through gestures and vocalizations. This primary intersubjectivity involves direct interactions without referencing external objects. Trevarthen studied how infants and mothers share control over their interactions, predicting each other's actions in a way that differs from interactions with inanimate objects. Stern observed that infants initially focus on predictable interactions from their own actions but, by 3 months, begin to engage with less predictable actions from others. Recent studies show that even younger infants align their gaze with adults' vocal behaviors and anticipate being picked up. Infants as young as 45 minutes old attempt to mimic adult facial expressions and vocal rhythms, indicating an early drive for communication. The still face paradigm demonstrates that infants become distressed when caregivers suddenly stop responding. While our desert island scenario is hypothetical, real-life examples exist, such as profoundly deaf children who create their own sign language, known as home sign, when isolated from formal sign language. However, these children still observe language users, which influences their development. In autism, mutual engagement with neurotypical individuals can be challenging. Neurotypicals may feel treated as objects, while autistic individuals might connect better with each other. This mismatch in engagement styles raises questions about the underlying causes. Next, we describe our methods for examining multi-agent interactions in a one-dimensional, perceptual crossing environment. Here, 2 agents move along a circular line, trying to create crossing events by coinciding with a stimulus, such as another agent or a stationary object. Each agent receives observations about its position, previous crossing values, actions, and rewards. They can choose to move left, right, or stay still, affecting their positions incrementally. We train these agents using a reinforcement learning framework, where each agent also employs a small long short-term memory, LSTM, network to predict crossing events. This LSTM is trained offline using data collected from previous episodes. During each step, the LSTM provides predictions and confidence levels, which help shape rewards and identify uncertainty. We utilize proximal policy optimization, PPO, for simultaneous training of both agents, with each agent's policy network based on LSTM and receiving 4-dimensional observations. We will now outline the various reward functions we investigate. Section Summary. In this section, we explore the intrinsic motivations behind human language development and social interaction, highlighting that while infants may not develop language in isolation, they exhibit a drive for communicative relationships through early interactions with caregivers. We also describe our experimental setup using a multi-agent reinforcement learning framework to investigate how agents anticipate and respond to crossing events in a shared environment, aiming to understand the dynamics of mutual engagement. Section: A Drive for Understanding. In this section, we explore intrinsic rewards that motivate specific behaviors in each agent. Each agent uses a long short-term memory, LSTM, model to predict if a crossing will happen in the next time step and provides a confidence level for that prediction. Our understanding drive is represented by a reward function where, if an agent's prediction is correct, the reward is based on the uncertainty of that prediction. If the prediction is wrong, the reward increases exponentially as the certainty approaches complete confidence. This encourages agents to explore areas that seem predictable but can still be surprising. We question whether this surprise is enough to make agents want to interact with each other. Next, we discuss the drive for being understood, which can be interpreted in several ways. One way is through imitation, where agents are motivated to imitate each other. Previous studies have shown that without external rewards, agents might end up doing nothing to maximize their rewards. To counter this, we introduce a reward based on observing reciprocal actions in recent interactions. We use two distinct functions, one that promotes imitation and another that rewards imitation. The promoting imitation function rewards an agent for creating a crossing pattern through its actions, which is then followed by the other agent imitating that pattern. The imitation reward, on the other hand, rewards an agent for observing a pattern and then actively replicating it. Both functions analyze the last 10 steps of interaction history, focusing on crossing transitions rather than absolute states. We also introduce a broader concept of influence and impressionability, where agents receive rewards for maximizing the mutual information between their actions and the other agent's observations, and vice versa. This means agents want to both influence and be influenced. We relax the strict requirements of imitation and instead focus on high mutual information between observed and generated crossings. Each agent keeps a rolling record of the last 20 chunks of actions and crossings to calculate this mutual information. To avoid sensitivity to low counts, we add Dirichlet priors to our calculations. We then determine the impressionability reward by comparing mutual information over the full buffer with that over the first 15 chunks, encouraging changes in mutual information. The influence reward is calculated similarly for active crossings followed by passive observations. We sum these rewards to create a full reward that encourages agents to influence and be influenced by each other. We also consider previous work that rewarded agents for influencing their environment but did not account for the environment's influence on the agents. Finally, we examine the effects of removing the drive to be impressionable while retaining the drive to influence. Section Summary. In this section, we explore intrinsic rewards that motivate agents to understand and be understood through mechanisms like predicting crossing events and encouraging imitation. We implement reward functions based on mutual information and reciprocal actions to foster interaction, allowing agents to influence each other while also being influenced, thereby enhancing their collaborative behavior. Section: Sub-reaction time anticipation. In this section, we explore the concept of sub-reaction time anticipation. We recognize that if we can predict each other's actions before we have time to react, it indicates understanding. For instance, if there's a 2-time-step delay between our observation and action, and we can maximize the information shared between our observations and responses faster than that delay, it suggests that we anticipated those observations beforehand. An example is when one of us starts to say something, and the other completes the sentence, showing anticipation of the conversation. Next, we consider the benefit of intrinsic motivation to be understood. We examine a scenario where cooperation is essential, but only one agent receives an external reward. This task is more complex than a typical Lewis language game since there's no shared reward. In this setup, one agent receives a random signal that determines their reward based on the other agent's position in a defined space. The second agent does not receive any reward regardless of their actions. We also remove the component of mutual information related to impressionability to see how it affects the task. In our results, we first focus on the drive to understand, or artificial curiosity, without the drive to be understood. We analyze the average results over multiple runs, noting that initially, rewards come from reducing errors but soon shift to creating errors in certain situations. There's a brief phase where interactions are preferred, and we observe that cumulative rewards increase when we engage with each other or with shadows. Next, we look at the drive to imitate and be imitated. Here, we find that interactions between us are common, with repetitive crossing patterns. Limited rewards can be gained by interacting with shadows, while stationary objects do not provide rewards. Finally, we examine the drive for influence and impressionability. We again see that interactions between us are frequent, but the patterns are less predictable than before. Rewards are not simply tied to the number of interactions. Instead, the mutual information shared is crucial. Interestingly, when we reduce the drive to be impressionable, leaving only the drive to influence, the number of interactions does not decrease. This suggests that we learn to alternate in influencing each other to gain rewards. Section Summary. In this section, we explore how agents can anticipate each other's actions through intrinsic motivations, even when only one agent receives an extrinsic reward. Our findings indicate that while the drive to understand and influence each other enhances cooperation, the specific dynamics of self-other interactions and mutual information play a crucial role in achieving rewards, regardless of the presence of impressionability. Section: Sub-reaction time anticipation. In this section, we explore sub-reaction time anticipation. Even when we introduce a delay of 2 time steps for both agents between observing and acting, we can still optimize the same reward function, with agents favoring self-other crossings. We observe that both agents learn to navigate around the circle together, occasionally pausing to catch up with each other. Next, we examine the impact on an extrinsically motivated task. Our findings show that when we combine a mutual information reward with an extrinsic reward given only to Agent 0 for signaling Agent 1 to be in one of the 2 halves of the environment, Agent 0 learns to reward Agent 1 through interaction. This helps guide Agent 1 to the correct area. However, without the ability to receive intrinsic rewards, Agent 1 does not cooperate. While we did not need impressionability rewards to establish self-other interactions, removing them does decrease performance in the extrinsic reward task. If both agents only seek to influence each other, Agent 0 struggles to direct Agent 1 to the correct half of the line based on its private information. In summary, our investigation supports the idea that being impressionable is beneficial when there is an extrinsic reward to gain from being influenced by the sender, particularly in situations where the sender does not need to be influenced in return. Being impressionable is advantageous when obtaining an extrinsic reward relies on an unequal interaction between a learner and a teacher.